Welcome to MarTalks, the #1 podcast for e-commerce and marketing applications. MarTalks is devoted to covering the latest technology developments that drive the global commerce ecosystem from advertising to last mile. Enjoy all of our content at rosensteingroup.com/martalks-podcast.
Welcome to another episode of MarTalks. We're going to entertain you today with an individual who just showed up in e-commerce last week. Actually, he's got closer to 25 years experience. He spent some time with some of the bigger names in the business, like Boston Beer Works, one of my absolute favorites. And he's going to prove to us that brewers actually make the best e-commerce entrepreneurs and leaders. He spent some time with Dell. We're going to forgive him that. He spent some time leading the folks over at Acquia as the chief of staff, and currently is the head of the show, the CEO of ElasticPath, our favorite Canadian-American composable commerce platform. With that, welcome Bryan House to MarTalks.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I appreciate you being here today. I've been excited to talk to you because I've been following ElasticPath for many, many years. Obviously, I put quite a few people to work there that have had a wonderful time. And it's one of those rare instances where you have a company that is born in one country, joined with a company in another that actually works out.
Yeah.
Oracle can't even do that with companies that are in the same country, but whatever. We're going to find out what happens with CBS too. Bryan, ElasticPath has been in the composable space now for, well, I guess longer than anyone. But for listeners who have just moved back after going native in the Arctic Circle, how do you describe what someone who thinks Shopify is the beginning and end of e-commerce?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think, e-commerce comes in a million different flavors and shapes and sizes. And, Shopify has built a great business with some, great technical innovation, with some really interesting business model innovations for a type of commerce, very much focused on B2C. They arm the rebels, and their business is a long tail. 80% of their store merchants are doing less than 100,000 a month, right? So it's a great, easy to use, easy to onboard tool for a certain type of shopper that has a relatively straightforward catalog. But as you move into the enterprise, you get into more complex catalog scenarios, complex commerce scenarios. Solutions like ElasticPath become really, really valuable. My shorthand for sort of what we're really good at is we're commerce for weirdos, right? When you have requirements that don't fit in any box, we're a great platform for you, right? One of the things, our ICP, our ideal customer profile, is mid-market B2B that are 50 to 500 million in gross merchandise value. And what we see in that space is most of the sort of incumbent platforms and prospects and customers tend to be DIY, right? They built their own. And the reason for that was there were no sort of commercial off-the-shelf commerce platforms that met their unique requirements. And so, our sort of guiding product principle has really been about offering flexibility combined with sort of military grade stability. So you can handle a whole range of requirements that sort of are maybe non-traditional or sort of outside the box, if you will. Do that all with the platform, build, platforms that meet your unique requirements, and don't have to sort of be in the business of building and maintaining a commerce platform from scratch, because that's not your core competency. Your core competency is manufacturing or distribution or HVAC parts or whatever it might be.
Well, there are a lot of folks that I'm aware of that have that Frankenstein sitting in the basement that they've patched together through the years with duct tape and spit and a little bit of chewing gum and a prayer that are just dying to upgrade to something that actually makes sense and that they don't require extracting tribal knowledge from a corpse in order to, resurrect when something goes down. And for them, I'm sure ElasticPath is an answer to their prayers. But, I do want to jerk you back for a second to Shopify because, why not pile on just a little bit? Because you said something to me that resonated, and I wanted to get a little more thought on that.
Sure.
You described Shopify as more of a fintech company than a commerce platform. I mean, what does that distinction actually mean for a brand?
Sure. I mean, at the end of the day, their critical business model innovation was we can subsidize software with payments, right? So, whether you're a mom and pop shop or you're a, Fortune 500 brand, everybody knows that Shopify in it, for the software is very inexpensive. And the reason for that is you require you to use Shop Pay, and right, they penalize you if you don't, right? And if you look at their revenue, the good news is they're a public company. 75% of their revenue is payments revenue. That looks a lot like a fintech company. In the same way that Toast in the restaurant technology space is the same, the exact same way, the same profile. They're making their money in the fintech. And what's interesting about that is in the SMB market, those businesses aren't necessarily negotiating with banks to do for payment rates, right? And they're not building their own deals with PayPal or JP Morgan Chase or Stripe, right? And so they just want a solution that works so they can take credit card payments. And so you can mandate a credit card solution in that scenario. But when you go in the enterprise, one of the things that we see is, hey, we do all of our banking through JP Morgan Chase. So we're going to use their payment rails, or we do it all through Fiserv. We're going to use their payment rails, or whatever it is. And so the dynamics and the flexibility, or the dynamics of like mandating a payment rail change dramatically. What's interesting now is watching commerce. Commerce has now introduced, try to replicate the Shopify model, saying, hey, everybody has to use our payment rail, except in the enterprise because they can't win the enterprise, right? And so we've been in the payments business for a while, and we saw the same dynamics play out. It works. It's a great solution at the SMB market where they just want to be able to take credit cards. But as you sort of move up and understand banking relationships and all the sort of multi-dimensional nature of it, suddenly that model breaks down pretty quickly.
Yeah, I kind of think of like AMC theaters are really in the popcorn business. They're not really, they don't make the
That's right.
movies, but that's what you're there
That's right.
for. It's kind of the
Exactly.
same
And they make
thing.
all their
Yeah.
margin in popcorn, right? It's
Yeah.
exactly. It's a great analogy.
Yeah. And if they made a movie, it'd be pretty mediocre. I'm pretty sure. Pretty sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It'd be tough. Well, anyway, well, let's kind of dive in a little bit more to that specific functionality that
Mhm.
a B2B company is going to need if they're going to upgrade their
Mhm.
platform. And one of the knocks that I've heard about, you have an AI tool that
Mhm.
literally can create an API connector for a legacy system that has no native integration to
Mhm.
ElasticPath. I mean, it sounds right there like you've licked the complexity bug. Now, could you walk me through exactly what your little AI API maker does in plain speak?
Sure. So we have an integrated capability in our platform called Composer, which is, think of it as an integration platform as a service. And
Mm,
so, then, when you have you know, any modern commerce application is the accumulation of multiple technologies. There's no one vendor that provides your commerce storefront, your ERP, your accounting general ledger, your inventory management, your order management, your shipping and fulfillment and taxes, right? Nobody provides all those things. So if you're going to be in digital commerce, you are going to need to have multiple applications and you need to stitch them together. And so we built a integration platform as a service native into our platform such that we would simplify the process of building those integrations, right? And they typically end up being some sort of secure handshake so you can authenticate across the system, and then some element of ETL, extraction, translation, and moving data around and into the right places, and maybe some business logic in there. And so that's all built right in our platform. And so you can connect to hundreds of enterprise applications, build integrations into our systems. And if one of those applications isn't available, you can do that in a bespoke fashion. And we have this all, we initially built this in a low code editor environment. So any sort of power business user could do this in addition to developers. But what's been really interesting over the last couple of years is with the introduction of AI, suddenly now we can do all of that with AI and accelerate that, right? And so now suddenly the overhead of building integrations has gone to almost zero, right? Because it's very easy for the AI to communicate with APIs on either side, do the handshake, do the data mapping, and insert logic very, very easily. And so this is the thing that we're excited about because when we look at commerce implementation projects, one of the big challenges with commerce is even if you have a platform, whether it's DIY or an existing commercial off the shelf platform, there's all sorts of problems with it, right? It's old. You built it 5, 10 years ago, right? It's sort of, you have all these workarounds that have become part of your business, and you might look to change that. But the cost of an implementation for commerce is so significant, right? It's typically 6 months to 2 years, $500,000 to $2 million. depending on sort of the level of complexity you have. And so but we break that down and where does all the time and cost come? Typically it's front end development, integrations, and data migration. And so those are the places that we're applying AI to sort of how do we break those problems down and make them much, much more efficient and much more cost effective to really change the dynamics of what it means to implement a new commerce system, right? Because if your commerce system is upgrading that, replatforming is a big digital transformation project, in sort of today's economy, that a lot of people are like, no, I don't want to do that, right? They need a compelling event to do that. But if we can change the pain gain formula and dramatically alter the cost equation for upgrading or changing platforms, suddenly now that unlocks a lot of new capabilities and enables you to solve problems that you've just been dealing with for some amount of time.
Now, I'm not going to ask you to do the math in your head, but I mean, what I've read now is that you've cut the implementation times by 75%. So, in terms of dollars, if you've got a $250 million aerospace manufacturer that's adopting ElasticPath, do you have any idea what you would tell the CFO going in the door? It's like, look, going with our solution is going to save you X in man hours.
We've done deals where, look, commerce is a red ocean market. We're in against competitors and we're coming in at a third of the price of the alternative sort of implementation solution, typically with an SI and what have you. So, I the big, hairy, audacious, or the BHAG goal I gave my team was, and this is a combination of product and services, is I'd love to get to a point where we could do an implementation in 6 weeks and $100,000 without sacrificing the core value proposition of the platform. And I think that would be fundamentally game changing in the same way that we talked about with payments and other companies and really, change the market. Are we there yet? No. But, we've made significant strides to automating the implementation, really sucking the costs out, because what we're trying to build is great long-term relationships with customers. And we know that the implementation is the hill to climb to get to the starting line, right? You don't before you even can run the platform. And so we need to make that hill as sort of with as least little altitude as possible and make it easy to onboard and take advantage of the unique things our platform brings to customers.
Well, I'm just a fan that you've told your team to do something big, hairy, and audacious. I think
Yeah.
it's great.
Yeah,
A
it's
lot of
funny.
folks don't do that.
I was at an event this week and they're like, we love to hire people who are willing to take on wildly unrealistic challenges. And I was like, I love that the way to describe it, right? Because that's the thing, particularly in a young company, you have to be able to like willingly punch above your weight and be like, there's no way we can do this. Let's figure out a way.
I mean, if that isn't the definition of an entrepreneur, I don't know what is. It's like, oh, you're going to
Exactly.
be competing, in broad brushstrokes with several billion-dollar companies. Sure, we can do that. No problem.
Exactly. Exactly. You have to get excited by those challenges to be an entrepreneur and to build startups and that's sort of my background. So I love the sort of big challenge and ElasticPath is creating lots of opportunities to explore those kind of big challenges. The great news is the team has really embraced that and understands the value and potential competitive advantage that it brings. So, where our competitors are talking about like, hey, we'll bring in Accenture and Deloitte. Well, like you can, how many seven figures, how many multiples of seven figures do we need to do an implementation with that? Like, I don't want to do that. I think the market has moved on from those kinds of solutions.
Yes, they certainly have, but it hasn't stopped the major SIs from developing new products on their own that they're
Sure.
busily marketing to make up
Sure.
for that lost revenue.
Sure.
Uh,
Like, and they do great things, and
They do.
it's not to slab on them, but that's the appetite for that in the market that we see has diminished significantly.
I'd say they've done a better job of really helping the company understand its overall strategy, particularly when
Hmm.
adopting AI. I think that's
Hmm.
that's one of the things they're doing is saying these are what you guys are capable of doing, and we're not going to give you the 10 speed just yet. You need to drive around on this trike for a little bit to make sure you got the hang of it because it is new, and you haven't done it before. So not to say that, most Global 2000 firms are riding around on tricycles, but, effectively, they should
Hmm.
be. It'd be safer. Now, this AI solution, this AI capabilities, that's something that you guys built internally, or did you acquire any of it, or did you partner on any of that?
No, no, we're building our building internally. You know, our team has readily embraced AI, and so we're using it across our global services team, across our engineering team, across sales and marketing. I took we certainly wrote our sort of mandate email like, hey, this is an important thing. We have to embrace this, and really it was a way to sort of set a cultural benchmark and say like, this is going to be important going forward. So I need you to get on board and experiment and keep an open mind, if you will. But, one of the things that's been really, really interesting is it's been creating this sort of virtuous cycle, if you will, in that people are like, oh my gosh, I didn't know I could do a wildly unrealistic thing. And look how it came out. Like, how else can I apply that? Right. And it doesn't, my sort of take on this, and I certainly would not claim to be a developer, but in talking to individuals, is at the end of the day, and I was a product manager for a long time, the R&D staff wants to build things. They love building things and building things that are useful, that get adopted, that, and they bring a ton of ideas to the table and they want to try those ideas. And so, for us, it's interesting, the psychedelics analogy, it's this accelerant to getting to there a lot faster, right? And so, in some ways it leads to faster experimentation. In you can sort of try things and A/B test them and try an idea, and if it works, great. If it doesn't, throw it away and get back. And you haven't spent 3 weeks on it, or a month, or 2 sprints on it, right?
Right.
You can the pace at which you're able to move and see tangible value, and sort of this reward structure of being a builder is accelerating, right? The half life has gone is so much shorter now, and so that I think what we're seeing from our developers is they're like, hey, I like this. This is helping me do the things that I want to do and do it faster. I love it.
It is an accelerant without a doubt.
Mhm.
It is an accelerant, and it's not. It's. I have not, at least with the software companies that I work with, seen it removing the need for anyone yet.
Mhm.
I've just seen it augmenting and enhancing whatever the functionality that individual is engaged with. But I'm working primarily with entrepreneurial, early stage firms in that 50 to 500 person sweet spot where it's all about growth. It's all about the growth
Yep.
story. So they need as much gasoline on that fire as they can get. But let's move on to kind of the meat of what I hope we're going to cover in this episode, which
Sure.
is B2B, because
Mhm.
B2B is the kind of undiscovered country in my estimation for commerce. There's so many B2B companies that just have inadequate, antiquated, homemade solutions that could benefit from modern commerce. And yeah, again, they just got two people responsible for doing it. So how do they do it? And one of the major issues that a lot of complex discrete manufacturers have is they've just got these immense product catalogs and
Mhm.
with
Mhm.
thousands of variations in a single product that they're essentially configuring for their
Mhm.
end customers. I see this a lot in aerospace where you've got a
Mhm.
servo manufacturer that makes 700 different versions of that servo, and each servo has 50 to 100 components. So being able to arrange that adequately and capably is a challenge. It's an impossibility for Shopify, for example.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
I look at the number of variations you handle for one of your best clients, Serena and Lily, which
Mhm.
is not high tech. It is great furniture though. Gotta love it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm not sitting on any right at the moment, but I do if I go downstairs.
Nice.
Why does handling that complex catalog matter so much to that discrete manufacturer?
I think it's, if we take a step back, it really aligns with how they sell, right? And sort of where their value proposition is, right? And so like in the Serena and Lily example, they would have design stores that designers would come in and they sell premium products. And then those premium products, you have lots of options and lots of choices to make it work for your second home, for your primary home, right? And to, that you're spending good money on. And so their value is their ability to customize it for you. Same with, aerospace manufacturing. I'm guessing in that, you have very specific specifications for some innovation that you've built. You need the parts that fit into those tightly defined specifications. Those, you know, typically in a commerce platform, those are constraints that are outside the sort of initial uh, vision and sort of capabilities of the product, right? And so, so what happens is if you go online, you either do one of two things. You either sacrifice your sort of core value proposition and the thing that you do uniquely well, or historically, what you've typically done is you bring in salespeople to essentially encode all of that sort of customizability in their brain, right? And they understand how the business works, how manufacturing works. They've apprenticed at your company for 10 years. They can help a buyer figure out what all the options are and what specifically they need and what the configuration, the assembly, whatever those elements are, to just get exactly the thing that you need for your process. And so, both of those are hedges against the inherent complexity of your product, right? And so when you bring them online, organizations have typically been forced to have a decision: do I sacrifice the sort of unique things that I'm able to do, or do I have to build my own solution in B2B in order to sort of support all of this complexity, right? And it needs to be flexible enough to meet our unique business requirements. And so what we've seen, and one of the things that we're really excited about in B2B, is there's so many DIY platforms that someone built themselves to because they knew their business better than anyone, and no commercial off the shelf fit it. And so we're a platform designed for builders to enable you to give you the flexibility to build the unique thing that you need. And so that we fit really well for those organizations that are used to building solutions, but are sort of rethinking where their core competency is. And so, like for the catalog specifically, the thing that we've done that's really sort of novel is we took the sort of long pole at the center of a commerce platform and we broke that down into discrete microservices. So the products themselves is a microservice, the pricing associated with them, and then the organization of those products are all discrete microservices that come together in sort of this virtual instantiation that is a catalog. And so what that means in B2B scenarios, if you have customers that all have negotiated contract pricing, well, it's very easy to have one set of products with thousands of price books associated with it. So each customer gets their negotiated pricing. Or if you have complex products with thousands of variations, we can support 10,000 variations for a given product in a way that, typical commerce platforms support 200 variations, 250 variations, right? So you just can't squeeze that, that's a square peg and round hole problem. You just can't squeeze those products into traditional commerce systems. But with ours, you can do that really well. In fact, in a bundle scenario, like you're building a complex assembly, we can have as many as 1,500 products into a configuration, dynamically priced. You can price it however you want, but that's a pretty significant configuration for in a B2B scenario, right? And so, as I think about it, it's giving those B2B salespeople a superpower, so that way they don't have to, it's sort of like in London, if you were a taxi driver before GPS, you had to memorize the whole city map of London. That was how they tested you, right? Like, can you imagine a salesperson at one of these discrete manufacturers knowing all the things? That's a hard problem to have. It takes years to learn. Now we can encode all of that into a system to make it easier for them. So then they can focus on the value add in there, which is sort of getting the deal done, building relationships, and then the system has that intelligence built into it to support their unique product requirements. And there's a lot of lived experience in our product in terms of where complexity lies in product catalogs. And so, so much of that we've built into that. And, like an example now as we move into sort of LLMs for discovery around product catalogs, one of the challenges is there's only so much information on a product detail page that a human can grok, right? And so there's sort of a subset of all the things about a product that you put on a product detail page for human consumption. But if you want the LLMs to recommend your product, there's a wealth of information that you'd want the LLM to know in terms of where to do it. So we provide unlimited attributes for products. So, probably 80% of them are just feeding LLMs from the sort of recommendation algorithm rather than the, intended for use on the product detail page, right? So it's all about sort of unlocking in making available sort of in code all of this complexity that's inherent into a product catalog to make it easier to consume, easier to discover, and easier ultimately to buy for your end customers.
Well, I mean, you just in B2B, you've got to track so many aspects that are just
Hmm.
completely foreign to B2C. I mean,
Hmm.
just in a tube that goes into a servo, you've got things like capacity, pressure rating, burn through
Yeah,
time,
exactly.
compound compatibility. I mean, it's endless. Like you having that capability in a package that can just be implemented in, well, not 6 weeks time, but knowing that we're pushing there. We're trying to get
Mhm.
there. I mean,
That's
that's
right.
being a good partner. And with that, I think we should talk a little bit more about partners because
Mhm.
you mentioned a little bit earlier on, there's becoming more of an issue with the incentive alignment between vendors and systems integrators because we've got a pressure to keep implementation less and less expensive, which is a major revenue driver for the side. So, I mean, how is Elastic Path navigating those partner relationships with your when your AI is essentially compressing their billable hours that your SIs depend on?
Yeah, I mean, I think the for us, it's we're looking for partners who are very much aligned in sort of our world, right? And we're a SaaS vendor, so we're in the lifetime value business, right? So we want to build long, productive relationships with customers. And so, we're looking for partners who are looking to do the same, and we have good relationships with partners. We'll work alongside them in projects, we'll sub work to projects, right? But what's interesting about us is, we're at a phase where our expertise on our product is higher than anyone in the world, right? So
Mhm,
in
mhm.
some ways, if the you have a complex use case for commerce and you're looking for expertise to come in, how do I implement this with the system and how do I architect it, how it ties into the other systems I have? Our people have the deepest expertise in our product can help you do that. There's other roles that are valuable. There's, sometimes businesses come in and say, well, what should we do? How should we approach this market? How should we do a thing? Right. And so, and that's not necessarily systems integration, that's sort of strategy consulting. Great. Those, we don't want to do that. That's the role that partners play. But I think, for us, and certainly this is true in the market for buyers, is there's a ton of price pressure on the project implementation side. There's no getting around that. And so, we work with partners who understand that and are looking to build long-term relationships with customers alongside us. And, if that's a relationship that works, then we can build a productive relationship. But we're ready and willing to take advantage of our product expertise to make our customers successful too.
Well, I know that you guys have done some great work with Valtech and EPAM, and we're going to throw them a little bit of love here because they've certainly been long-term players in the B2B commerce segment and continue to be. And I think to your point, they've adjusted their service provision to really talk about the business's overall goals and strategies and
Mhm.
capabilities and what is their growth strategy, what is their multinational footprint, what is their market penetration, what markets do they want to go into, and then providing the suite of services and that complement the solutions that their partners provide. And they certainly have become to they've come to provide have much more of a premium on those vendors that have really taken an active interest in reducing the time and complexity aspect of going live. And you
Mhm.
obviously you're playing by that same set of rules, which is great.
Yeah, and the other thing to add there is it's part of what we're trying to do is not simply through implementation automation, right? It's about how do you make improvements in the products so that way you actually facilitate that acceleration, right? So as an example, we've built an MCP server that ties into our SDK for all the front end development. So the purpose, it's how do we accelerate the front end piece, right? Because the patterns are well understood both in B2C and B2B commerce, right? That's a perfect thing to be automated, just like we talked about previously with integration. So, you know, there's as much sort of leverage and sort of focus in the product organization on the same goal of how do we accelerate the implementation as there is in the services side as well.
You've been in the digital experience space now for almost 20 years, right?
Yeah.
Well, what was there a particular moment when you became a true believer in composable?
That's a good question. So it's funny. So when I was at Acquia's sort of business model was we were a platform as a service provider for the Drupal open source CMS system. And what that meant is one of the biggest problems in that market that we addressed was where do I host my Drupal site, right? And Drupal was a single tenant implementation project. It was difficult to do a multi-tenant implementation of Drupal, although Acquia has subsequently released it in the last year or so. And so, but what was interesting is when you're a platform as a service provider, effectively what we did was we were selling web servers for you to power your front ends for your website. And I remember I put in our one of our executive offsite agendas, like what do you think about headless content management? Because Contentful had just launched and a few others. And this was like 2014, and we all looked around the room. And we're like, "Well, God, that's a threat to our business. Like, I don't know if this headless is in sort of composable is the way we want to go." Um, but it sort of hit the radar then, and it was funny because I had a customer at the time, Whole Foods, who had told us like, "Hey, we want to have flexibility on the front end. We don't want the application to tell us what the front end technology is because those usually be pretty tightly coupled historically in the
Bingo.
CMS space, and sort of very monolithic. And like, we don't want to hire, high end, high price developers that have specialized knowledge. The front end tech moves so much faster. We can hire much lower cost front end developers that are staying up on, whether it's Angular or Rust or Next or, whatever it is, Vue. And so they want to move faster there. And putting those two together, I was like, wait a minute, there's a market there. And so I made it, I would do some investing on the side, and I invested in a composable commerce company that was headless and all API first, right? And I saw the power of that in my time at Acquia. And that actually became the company that ElasticPath acquired in 2019, 2020 called Molten, which is my entry into the company, right? Into ElasticPath. So, I've seen this for, probably a dozen years and started to see the potential impact of it. And as I think about it, whether it be you call it headless or composable or API first or microservices or mock or whatever you call it, this is really just what modern application development looks like. And I said up at the front, every digital commerce stack is a heterogeneous architecture, right? I can
Yeah.
pick any monolith, whether it be Magento, Salesforce, whatever, and you go look at what their actual architecture and practice looks like, there's 10 vendors on the slide, right? And so composability and sort of this API first principle just accelerates that process. It makes that easier to do the stitching, right? Everybody likes to talk. There's certainly been a lot of backlash around composable lately,
Mhm.
and started by Mariano at VTEX, and mock, and I get it, right? We all sort of there's a inherently positioning in that, but people like to slag off the Frankenstein stack, but if I go look at a Magento stack implementation, there's many technologies there. I go look at Salesforce, there's many technologies. They inserted with a cartridge. I'd rather work with APIs than cartridges.
Mhm.
So, every important enterprise stack is heterogeneous. And so the question is, what's the best way to build heterogeneous architectures? I think API first approaches are by far the best. And as we're seeing in the AI world, a big conversation topic this week, I was at a big conference, was, what's the role of MCP going forward, right? Because so much, the
Mhm.
MCP provides a set of instructions for accessing a set of tools, typically APIs. But at some point in we're going to encode those instructions in the APIs themselves. Do I really need an intermediate layer and an MCP? We're not there today, but at some point there begs the question: is MCP a long-standing protocol or not, or is it something that'll be just usurped at the API level, right? But this is unquestionably what modern application development, right? You're writing anything in OpenClaw, you're only connecting the APIs, right? To run whatever it is you're building in OpenClaw, right? So I think there's a lot of easy ways to sort of discount or knock different approaches, but I think it's sort of a glass houses problem. And really what I want to build is the best tools for developers to build solutions for their business.
Well, you've certainly been through an awful lot of building and change
Mhm,
there at ElasticPath, as you just mentioned,
mhm.
from working with Jamie at Jameis over at Molten. I think I met Jameis when he was with Demandware once upon a
Yeah, yeah.
time. But another boss, a fine Bostonian. But that experience has I'm sure, taught you a huge amount about the kind of leaders and the kind of people that can thrive in a dynamic environment. As you said, take on that hairy, that impossible problem. Well, what qualities do you think people should possess to succeed in that kind of an environment?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question, right? I was at a AI company before I came to ElasticPath that was founded out of MIT. And, one of the things I experienced there, and I saw this reinforced again at this conference I was at this week, was there was very much a focus on pedigree. At MIT, it was where did you go to school? Where did you get your PhD and your master's from? In the tech and AI spaces, what other companies have you worked at? Have you worked at one of the Google, Facebook, Netflix, Amazon, Apple, right? And all those things. You raise a really interesting question around sort of like what kind of people thrive in scenarios that are very dynamic like this, right? And the half life of an idea of a plan right now in sort of this AI world is like a week, 2 weeks. It's crazy. And so there's this dynamism that have to be built. And it's interesting because, I really noticed this at my last company, which was an AI company out of MIT. And, the focus there was so much on pedigree, right? And it was where did you go to school? Where did you get your PhD? Who did you work with? And we see the same thing in people in tech is what company did you work at before? Did you work at Uber or Google or Amazon or Apple or wherever? But, the thing that I really skew towards is sort of a hustle mindset. Are you a person that's willing to, what are you willing to do? Are you willing to chase unrealistic goals? Are you, like I used to describe this in interviews years ago, where you're in a startup environment. There are 100 problems, and all those problems manifest themselves as balls on the floor. The person who thrives is the person who comes in, picks a ball, grabs another one, runs with it, and just goes off and does the thing, right? The person who struggles in those environments is like, which ball should I take? What do you want me to do with the ball, right? Like we can't, like there are companies where those that are environments for that, and they can sort of teach you, and that's a great place to learn. But in a dynamic environment like that, like ElasticPath, we just need people to run and go and be sort of deterministic and learn as they go. And our job as leaders is to provide guardrails and guidance in terms of which direction to roll and what are the important problems to solve. And then give all these really intelligent, thoughtful, passionate people the freedom to go chase the problem. And I think it's a hard thing to judge for, but you see it in their backgrounds and sort of what they're passionate about and what their hobbies are. And, do they have this sort of hustle mindset where they're, succeed at any cost? And certainly as I look back over my career, the best people that have gone on to have the most success all possess that, right? And they've been wildly successful in their jobs, whether they're working for me or working or afterwards. So it's certainly a thing that I am very focused on. And, pedigree's nice, but it's doesn't get you all the way.
Yeah, I mean, I've been really impressed with the results we get out of using Colby just to measure the
Mhm.
the cognitive profile of an
Mhm.
individual because that hustle, I mean, there is a way to measure it with the type A particularly. You're able to measure how likely is this person to come up with their own idea to just to be a fast starter and to do things that nobody's done before and be comfortable, in fact have to be doing things that nobody's done before. They're not going to follow directions or follow the rules. They were built to write them, and
That's right.
and it is important to really test for that and do it consistently, particularly if you're going to be hiring somebody to be your peer and to be bringing other people on board. And that's why we've been very, very happy with the results we've gotten with Colby, and we use that with any of our plans for our customers. But I echo that sentiment that pedigree doesn't get you that far, and certainly referrals don't get you that far. Just because
And
somebody's been a great person at one company does not mean they're going to be great in another. And I
yeah, I
hate to
mean,
say it.
it's and the other thing that you see a lot in this space is they have a playbook that they've run successfully somewhere else. And so the assessment isn't necessarily their ability to run the playbook because obviously they had success somewhere. The assessment is, does that playbook run here? And what is their ability to adjust and redefine their playbook based on the unique context that is here, what right now in this present. And I think that is probably the one of the biggest traps in terms of hiring, particularly when you're hiring
Hmm.
senior people,
Hmm.
right? It worked before, let's try it here. And turn if it doesn't work here, then wasted a lot of time, energy, and momentum on a thing that you were sort of evaluating the wrong thing, I guess.
It's all about innovation with an early stage
Mhm.
firm and how innovative does someone have that cognitive mindset? And if they're not, are they compatible with their
Mhm.
colleagues that have to be? I mean, you don't
Mhm.
necessarily want your CFO to be coming up with new and creative ways to take risk or to modify resume. Maybe not. I don't think as an investor, I would be thrilled with that when I saw that at my
Sure.
QBR. But I think that it is necessary for them to be comfortable with folks,
Mhm.
that are not singing off the sheet music, that are
Yeah,
doing
exactly.
things on their own and that are innovating, especially if you're going to be a leader. By definition, you're out front. There isn't any model there. You're creating,
That's right.
you're riding on it. You're riding on it. But for I love working with startups because it is always that creative aspect that draws me to the people that make startups that
Mhm.
we don't care if it's never been done before, or especially if somebody tells us it's impossible. It's like, great, that's a challenge I can sink my teeth into.
Exactly.
You're special people to do that. You're special people. You're fun to work with, which is why you're here
Yeah,
today.
that's right.
But I guess the if I was going to ask you one question from today, did you have an aha moment at any time during our conversation?
I a little bit of it is around sort of the sort of willingness to sort of take risk and living with the ambiguity necessary to that comes with taking risk is really the biggest piece of it. And it's funny when you're sort of in the day-to-day operations of your company, you don't necessarily sometimes you lose sight of like how what's the risk that we're asking people to take or the journey we're going on. And so conversations like this are always a good reminder like, hey, we're trying to do an audacious thing. We're trying to do something that, potentially is unrealistic and sort of be grounded in that, like, what's the ask we're making of our peers and our colleagues and help them understand that, hey, we're here to support them, right? Like every startup says, hey, we're going to fail fast. And that's a important piece. You have to live that as a culture, right? You have to forgive failure in that world. But, it's funny. I read a book yesterday. I'm a big golfer, and golf is not a game of perfect, and startups are not a game of perfect either, right? It's about living in the present. You have the information you have, and you make the best decision you can. And that is such a great analogy for what life in the startup is like, and being able to live with the sort of ambiguity and some of the risk associated with that is a huge piece of it.
Yes, and having a good hobby where you can
Mhm.
download and just take some time off is also really important. And I'm glad you have one.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, Brian, if you were a brand sitting on a legacy Frankenstein bespoke platform today, who is one contract renewal away from a real decision, what's the one thing you'd want them to walk away with this afternoon?
I think it's the question is your system and the tools that you use, are they defining how you work, or is your business defining how the tools work for you, right? And if it's the former, then I think there are solutions like ElasticPath out there that are designed to allow you to operate your business the way you need to operate it and do it successfully to fuel growth and, and what have you. So I think that's the ultimately the premise is if the you require flexibility and sort of the capabilities to handle the unique requirements of your business that you aren't getting today from your system, or it's too difficult to do, or requires too much customization or whatever. Solution like ElasticPath can make improve your quality of life, unlock new capabilities, and really enable you to run the business the way you would like to.
Well, with that, Brian, I'm going to say thank you very, very much for joining us today. It's been awesome.
Good, good. I really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for having me.
Well, I want to also thank everybody out there who's listening. Thanks for joining us on Mart Talks, and we'll see you next week.
Excellent.
All right.
Thanks for listening to Martalks, the #1 podcast for e-commerce and marketing applications. Be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and while you're at it, leave a rating and review. To find out more about how the Rosenstein Group can help you find the right leaders for your client development teams in MarTech and e-commerce, please visit our website at rosensteingroup.com.